Hey there, I'm Craig Winslow. I'm an experiential director and light artist, and I'm excited to talk to you today about a couple of my projects and explorations in Las Vegas and playing with light, meeting physical objects, and blending the physical and digital together. My talk is using projection mapping for augmented restoration. I'll tell you a little bit more about what that means. So first, a little bit about me and my background. My background is in industrial design, branding, and 3D art and animation. I definitely went down the rabbit hole of exploring technology and creating projects and concepts that I really enjoy, and those one thing leading to another. I'm going to share a little bit of my work here. This is a collaboration with Gemma O'Brien for Lightform. Projection mapping here on a black and white mural that Gemma designed and created, and just bringing this to life with layers of light and color. A little bit bigger project. This is for the NBA playoffs of the Trailblazers in 2018. We dropped a curtain, did a full takeover. It was a really exciting space. At the very end, they did all the player intros as well, so it was very exciting to see these larger-than-life, almost like Space Jam-esque intros of these 35-foot-tall players. And of course, Brilliant, my first permanent exhibit in Las Vegas that launched in 2018. I'm going to do a deep dive into kind of a never-before-seen behind-the-scenes a little bit of how we actually created this little technical feat in the desert. But backing up a little bit, this is a project I did called From the Past, Build the Future. It's a cyclical kind of sculpture. This is all real. It's not 3D. I did these painted objects from my childhood and really transformed something into something else. And this actually became kind of a mantra for me, and exploring the past and my relationship with time and how it relates to the future and technology. But first, I'm going to go through a quick glossary of terms. I'm sure you all know exactly what all these terms are, but I have three that are just a helpful context to have. First off, projection mapping. If you haven't heard of it, it is aligning projection objects to physical surfaces and objects. So this thing on the right here, the top is a unmapped, just projection test pattern output, and then the bottom right is mapping specific content to specific physical objects. It's very magical when everything aligns perfectly. Ghost signs, you're going to hear me talk about this. These are faded ads. If you don't know what these are, by the end of this talk, I guarantee you're going to know and start seeing them all around you. They are worn remnants of these beautiful hand-painted signs and advertisements. They're dating from like the late 1800s to mid-late 1900s. They are all over and just beautiful relics of times past. And then palimpsest is a faded ad containing multiple discernible layers. So a ghost sign, but multiple layers. You can see these beautiful examples here. I'll get into what all that means, but those three terms, I think you're good to go for my presentation. So here we go. I have a project that I'm very excited about that started during a Kickstarter. Projecting West is what it was called. I went from Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon. All along the way, we did these 15 days. Every single night, we found something and just projected something, made a little light art installation. My really good friend Mike Ackerman and I did this. We had like a story that unfolded along the way. And this night in Omaha, Nebraska, I projected on this giant 3-story tall bomb iron building in Omaha. And our main character, we just nicknamed him Little Buddy. He was feeling a little lost. We were feeling a little lost at the moment. But I was so excited to see these giant letters just light up, and it was something so off the cuff that we actually did this, and it was so fun, and I just realized I had to do something else with this sort of illumination of this sign. So when I got to Portland, I started realizing, oh, these old ghost signs, I had now a skill or a technique that I could apply to more of a restoration solution. So the realization hit me. If I could digitally recreate these old signs, then I could use projection mapping to actually add the light as a medium and use that to restore these ghost signs without damaging them, without repainting them. So I did it. This is a project called Light Capsules. This is an Orange Crush ad in Great Falls, Montana. And I've been doing this project since about 2015. Light Capsules is an ongoing project of augmented restoration, is what I've been calling it, an effort to digitally archive ghost signs and restore them through non-damaging augmented mediums. And I'll tell you about what that means here. So I'm very excited to be working on this project. That was a palimpsest ghost sign in Washington, D.C. on U Street. And I was very fortunate to be awarded a creative residency with Adobe. So from 2016 to 2017, I brought this project to life called Light Capsules. So all of these are kind of a selection of the past installations I've done. Here's during the day, and a slow fade into night. You know, one night only, I'll bring these back to life, and you really get to see like what they looked like when they were freshly painted, and then the next day it all disappears. So very exciting, and I'm going to dive through a little bit more of my process as I kind of use light and digital mediums to bring back these old, very hand-painted signs. So first off, these aren't fonts. These aren't typefaces. These are hand-painted signs. So there's letters, there's different forms, but everything needed to be outlined by hand for me to actually be honest with the media. I studied sign painting and sign writing techniques to actually get a sense of how to discern what these letters are, and then vectorize them in Illustrator. And of course, the hardest thing for me is to embrace the imperfections of not correcting what I'm seeing. So if the fit is slightly off, if the letter spacing, I can't correct that. I can't be like a very perfectionist designer. I actually have to be honest with what I'm creating, because when it gets projected back onto itself, it's not going to line up. So here's a Sam Moy & Co. In Portland, Oregon here. This was painted around 1916, super worn at the bottom. Here's my digital recreation. As you saw before, here's all the little points, and then it projected back onto itself at night. So what about repaints? The hardest part with these repaints is if there isn't one very clear layer, then it's hard to decide which layer is important, and you're kind of essentially giving a bias to what you think is important. Even if there's some super ghosted layer, there's still sort of a valid layer of history. Modern paints can also expand and contract with heat and temperatures changes, so that can create and bind to different elements of the artifact and be more damaging over time. And then the worst of all is if it's not a skilled sign writer or someone who's a direct apprentice of the person that painted the sign, which these were painted 100 years ago, so who knows if the apprentice is still around, then you could kind of ruined, or like a botched restoration, which is the worst, to see this beautiful sign that's fading away in time. And honestly, the best thing to do is to just let them fade and enjoy them while they last. So another technique that I use to kind of figure out what I'm actually looking at, because this is a very messy, multi-layered sign, right? You can see little elements of different letters, but in Photoshop, I can select by color range. So immediately isolating the yellow, my eyes can now finally see, okay, shoes, there's some sort of shoe ad here. This was a Buster Brown shoes ad in Astoria. Another example on the back of the Palace Theater in LA, I follow the breadcrumbs. So this has many layers that I was able to discern, but one of my favorite layers was this Best Years of Our Lives. Just getting enough of the letters to put together the title. I was able to find on IMDb all of these names and letters that perfectly fit to tiny little evidences on the actual ghost sign and could restore them. Another one, this is in Stoke Newington. I did a whole series when I was a creative resident with Adobe for the London Design Festival. This one's in Stoke Newington, beautiful two-layered sign. And my process for this is kind of difficult because here's my high-resolution stitched composite image. So I'll take a bunch of photos, stitch them together to be this perfectly flat. I can throw down some grid lines and whatnot. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to focus on what the first layer is. So here's a vectorization of the layer that I can see most clearly, Cake Bread Roby. And then isolate that, make it sort of a mask that can then kind of fade out. And then here's that exact same thing, but kind of just toning down those front layers so I can actually see the layer below it a little bit better. So here again is just the plain sign. Here's the most recent layer. Here's fading to the lower layer that I vectorized. And what I love about this is the sense of time. You can sort of see we're looking into a layer of the past right now. And this is a little more cleanly designed. There's 3 layers or 3 lines on either side. It's a lot more kind of like efficient and beautiful. And then as I go into the more future layer here, you can see, they have more locations now. They used the bottom to say, they're in multiple spots. They have many more things that they're offering as a company, and they kind of really crammed them all in there. But I love just sort of seeing that passage of time. Another great example here is this Stobart Sons & Co., and you can really discern a bunch of different grids and letters and things going on. And we needed archival photos and some sort of history reference for us to actually discern what that was. So fortunately, in Winnipeg, we had two beautiful references here. On the right, Barber Ellis Envelope Manufacturers. You can also see a very worn amount of hints of the top there. It says Ames Holson Tires. And then the left is a great example of the Stobart Sons & Co. So here's the sign. Here's one layer digitized. Here's Christie Grant Limited Mail Order, which had just enough to kind of figure out exactly what letters say, and then Ames Holson Tires. So really, I love that, with this project, I'm able to essentially open time portals into multiple layers in time rather than just restore something back to what it used to look like. You get the benefits of seeing this beautiful relic today, as well as unlocking all of these different layers to the past. And this is just a view I really like, kind of just to see under the hood a little bit as far as, these are vector shapes. They're not, your hand-painted letters or anything, but it's just this digital kind of framework that gets layered into the past. Another great example I couldn't not show here is this very popular, one of the light capsules I've done also in Winnipeg, this SX ham. The historical reference on the right, it's very worn, or an older, lower resolution, but it was enough to see cabbage rolls, a little more details about the bottom. And then we also had a product. So we had a physical 3D object that I could reference from a packaging standpoint, as well as a reference to the can that I was trying to recreate. Matt Cohen was my collaborator on this project. He produced the whole thing and collects a ton of memorabilia and documents all the signs in Winnipeg. This was a 3D model I created based on those textures. And then from that, I was able to also use the textures to bring this layer back. Again, you see a lot of wonkiness with the letters here. That's totally fine because I have to be honest with what I see, or when I project it. See the slow fade here? It's not going to line up perfectly unless I embrace what I'm seeing and the imperfections that are still there. Here's a nice little side-by-side of the current today and then my digital kind of not full projection, my Illustrator mock-up. And here's a video of how it ended up. That was a huge hit. A lot of people just loved that they could see sort of a can coming out of the wall there. Very exciting. My workflow for light capsules, first off, I'm location vetting, going through a lot of research, getting measurements, and kind of really figuring out the logistics of, is this possible to even get a projector at, for a night installation, where am I sourcing power, a lot of those little details. Once I'm actually there, I'm taking high-res photos, I'm stitching together to give myself the best sort of canvas to digitally recreate these letters. I'm in Blender a lot, creating references of distance and throws and image manipulation, as I mentioned, in Photoshop. And then production is really the bulk of the work here, where I'm vectorizing these letters. I'm trying to find references to little hints that I can figure out. And a lot of the times I'm just zooming in and making notes for myself, sketching out what letters I can see, and then putting together this sort of detective puzzle of what I can figure out. Then exporting, MadMapper is kind of my go-to for the actual projection mapping aspect back onto itself, and then documentation, photo, video, Lightroom, Premiere, and Photoshop to kind of make the best documentation of a one-night thing. Really needs to live on when I'm able to share it for many people. So from light capsules, near the end of my residency with Adobe, I did a road trip that was going through Las Vegas. So what I ended up creating was this full experience called Brilliant. It's a permanent exhibit, and you can go see it now, and I'm going to dive through the process here. The first off thing was, much like all of the past light capsules that I'd done, was, hey, what if I can apply this technique for ghost signs, but to neon signs, which in fact were, at one point, self-illuminating. Bulbs used to light up, so it was a really interesting test to see if it would even work. And fortunately, it really did. There was a buzz about people that saw this little teaser, and from that point, it became the struggle to make something permanent. So doing something pop up here, we had a generator, there's no power in this actual space. There was a lot of logistics to actually get through to build the infrastructure necessary to have projectors just essentially floating in space and hidden. Here's my canvas. It's this beautiful kind of smaller gallery it's called the North Gallery at the Neon Museum, and they have this giant main gallery, but this space was really only used for photo shoots, for weddings, and it became a space that needed to add all these layers of technology to them. So I first started out with a drone, and I got this beautiful 3D photogrammetry model that I got all together in Metashape, and this became a really great reference for me to actually plan out what the towers would be. You could see kind of a little teaser here of where I started sketching out, how do we put the technology and where. But it was a really difficult photogrammetry model because these are such complex shapes and just crude colors and just warped metal. But it was enough to get a gesture of what we were looking at. Here's the untextured model and the towers that I roughed in. Here's the textured model. This really helped me to kind of scale it up and get a sense of a lot of these details. So how many towers, where can they go to not disrupt the photo video efforts that they have and people that want to take wedding photos in the space, figure out how high, what angle, what lensing, what projectors. A lot of details went into this sort of space here. And then once I had that, I actually worked in Blender to create my own sort of visualizer of what each projector and lens would throw. Our coverage, this since changed, but it was really nice to actually get all this together. I'm sketching to get all these towers figured out. Like, I knew I wanted them to be these cylindrical shapes, and as small as possible. We want to make them hidden. And one of the things that came up was, a cylindrical shape. Well, you know about the flamingo. This is the original Flamingo Champagne Tower, which was in Vegas, and it was covered with these bubbles of neon, and it was the greatest reference. The CEO pulled out, and I'm not a local to Las Vegas. I'm based in Portland, Oregon, and grew up on the East Coast. So having this sort of breadth of knowledge was a great reference, and we pulled that in as a design inspiration for the towers themselves, as well as kind of like the treatment on the outside of them. So here's my really rough kind of like technical diagram of the AC going through. But fortunately, we had a really great partner, Yesco, which is a legendary sign shop themselves. They've built and fabricated and designed essentially all of the signs of the Las Vegas Strip themselves. So I was really fortunate and thankful to have them as a kind of fabrication partner. And we were going through all these details of figuring out how tall these needed to be, where exactly the holes needed to be, and got very, very specific with, okay, we're drilling these holes, what angle are very specifically these windows going to be, because it gets to be very, very hot, and all of these need to be properly cooled, and we ended up having towers. So here's me here. I think this was a surreal moment to actually put the drone up in the sky and see for myself that this isn't a render anymore. This became real life. And then here's the finishing on the outside, which turned out very beautiful, kind of this little reflection to it. Very subtle, but if you go take a look at the kind of circles there. So behind the scenes of actually creating the content, we used something called structured light. You might be familiar with it. It's this process of having a projector with a camera that's taking very specific photos of patterns and then figuring out where every single pixel is and color in relationship to where the projector is. So it gives you this amazing guide that I could then digitize. This is the spatial scanner in MadMapper that we're using. Lightform also uses a similar kind of technique to get a view and a very specific view of what you're trying to project onto. From there, I'm vectorizing. So I'm in Illustrator. I am digitally recreating every single bulb in this 360-degree space. We could watch this for another 20 minutes if you want, but I'm gonna skip ahead. After I've digitized all of these, including all of the neon, I'm creating assets. So I'm actually in After Effects taking those and animating them and coloring them, looking at historical references and archival images and footage to make sure I'm being honest with how I'm actually bringing these signs back to life. And I'm not putting too much razzle-dazzle there that wasn't already razzle-dazzle to begin with, or inventing my own kind of animations. And then production, Premiere Pro, I'm animating all of these sign animations together to this large show and animating across 8 different outputs for each projector. So this is probably a very manual way of doing it, but it was the way I was most comfortable with as a creator. And then I'm also synchronizing them. So across every projector, once I have this star output, for example, I need to make sure that the R is also synchronized in another projector output. So there's a lot of that happening. There's a lot of linking and making sure I'm being efficient and organized with all of my files. So if I need to change something in Photoshop that gets linked into After Effects, for example, or if I'm changing a mask in Illustrator here, that I can change that and it will update into After Effects. I can render that out, and then that, what gets out of Media Encoder gets updated into Premiere, like being really efficient with how I'm linking everything. And of course, a dash of a special sauce. My friend and collaborator, Michael Hill, created this amazing custom tool that allowed me to animate across all of these vector objects. So here's a simulation here of me clicking at the center of this Binion's horseshoe, and I could animate and export these amazing renders, not only from like one fixed point, but I could click at the bottom and it would do a nice fill up to the top. And this allowed me to animate thousands of bulbs at once in multiple different ways. This was just like blew my mind as far as like capabilities for how I was able to add a lot of special elements. And here's a moment where we first got everything mapped and turned on. You can see there's kind of hardware everywhere, but this was such a special moment for me to see everything finally mapped, and we had some alignment that we had to just finesse, but everything was pretty close on. You can see these, these are not working signs. These are all just completely, non-functioning artifacts that are being front projected with bulbs and neon animations. The show itself has a very nostalgic and emotional narrative to it, and there's a lot of people that see this and they tear up and they just have a visceral reaction to not expecting you would ever see these relics come back to life again. And I think there's just something really special and human about that. From a technical standpoint, seeing things even slightly off, you can see to the layman maybe you wouldn't notice, but this is shifted slightly down, so it has to get some refinement here. But once everything's perfectly mapped, it is really fantastic to see. So to contrast the little day shot we showed later or earlier, that's the downtown kind of Fremont Street, the old strip in the background there, and then in the foreground you're seeing Brilliant in its glory. And it's just kind of this magical moment of seeing these signs that used to be over on that strip that kind of lost their chance to shine, and they get that chance again. And it's a very exciting experience to see. So for my workflow is a little more complex than Light Capsules, but not terribly so. I'm essentially using the whole Adobe suite, starting with sketching, even Spotify to make sure I'm figuring out my soundtrack creation and what easily create playlists and whatnot. And once we had that all locked, Blender, Metashape, MadMapper, as I mentioned, for structured light. And then production is all Photoshop and Illustrator, After Effects, creating these animations, bringing them into Premiere and creating my primary show output edit. 360-degree views in that is really, really helpful because I'm able to see spatially, if a sign lights up over here, does my periphery pick up that, or do we need to have some sort of wider visual cue? Post-production, I had worked with actually the Premiere Pro team a little bit to get some custom plugins working for that timeline sync, encoding, and then activation is really the biggest part, where we are on site and we are uploading and deploying everything to the servers that were built, and really making sure that the refinement's happening, and any edits that we need to make we can kind of publish. And then documentation, so Premiere, Lightroom, just kind of polishing what we get for output there. And this is also just a really special moment of just seeing a close-up of the digital layers getting hit on a physical sign here, and you can actually see every single little pixel. But I kind of like that because you get close enough and you see what's happening, and it's honest that the technology is empowering this moment. So why Augmented Restoration? So Light Capsules and Brilliant, they both use this sort of a term I guess I've been really pursuing and excited about. And what I love about it is the physical artifact remains untouched and preserved. The ephemeral restoration is enabled through augmented mediums. So projection mapping is kind of my favorite and go-to because it doesn't require any wearables. It doesn't require, it is a multi-person experience. And most importantly, it enables a capacity to revive multiple layers in time. So you can sort of see on the right here, there's some palimpsest signs where I'm able to highlight multiple layers. That's more magic than anything. So what's next for me? I have a permanent light capsule getting planned in Astoria, Oregon. So this one I did during my residency. At the very beginning, this is sort of a high fidelity version with a video projector. What I've been working on is actually a lower not lower technology, I guess, but a more analog version using architectural gobo lights. So what you'd see in the theater and like a stencil that casts a specific light is working to precisely analyze or to align those and have this very low maintenance solution to bring to life these signs. And of course, things are always evolving, and history, as concrete as we think of it, kind of changes and gets revealed over time. So this medallion here was a complete, I just could not figure out anything here. And what was unearthed was actually this historical photo, which perfectly reveals this radio service code. This is the spot. I had no idea what, I had a hint of letters, but this blew my mind. So I'm very excited to add not only, this as a permanent exhibit in Astoria, but to add another layer and something that I wasn't able to complete before. And then of course, augmented reality. I've been developing a Light Capsules AR app. So similar to the projection mapping installations, but all of those enabling during the day on your phones, and you can actually swipe through time and learn about all the historical context of each one of these signs is a really special element. And then Brilliant, jackpot update. This is this huge update we've been working on, and by the end of this year, we'll have an amazing new, bigger Brilliant than Brilliant to announce. So I'm very excited for that. So that's my presentation. Thank you so much. I think these ghost signs are very special to me and special to a lot of people. I hope you look around and see them all around you now and appreciate them and be curious about your own surroundings and, my own pursuits of using technology and these different creation tools are just so impactful for me to be able to kind of shine a light on what used to be and, our artisans and hand-painted craftsmen from years and years ago that we can learn from. So I hope this was helpful and inspiring for you. And if you want to learn more about the project, go to lightcapsules.com. And then, of course, you can follow me on all the internet where I'll be sharing all of these different upcoming endeavors at Craig Winslow. Thank you so much.